Top 10 Grisly Tales from the American Frontier. You will never guess what the number 1 tale is. Like and subscribe for weekly videos. In the comments below, list one topic you think should be in a top 10 video and comment if you subscribe to this channel. The American frontier was a brutal environment. A land with few to no laws meant situations were often handled in dark and unusual ways. Violence was often a first resort. At other times, it was the natural world that posed the biggest threat to human survival. Nature on the frontier was vast and unforgivable. Here are 10 of the grisliest tales from the American frontier. 10. John Colter and the Human Hunt. John Colter, a legend of the American outskirts, gone through the vast majority of his time on Earth in the wild. In 1803, he joined the Lewis and Clark expedition, where he picked up fame as probably the best tracker and scout. After the endeavor, Colter worked for the Missouri Fur Company and was sent on exploring missions to caution Native American clans that the organization was making a beeline for them and needed to trade. He is generally thought to be the primary white man to see Jackson Hole and Yellowstone Lake. Individuals later named Yellowstone and close by locales as Colter's Hell concerning his depictions of the foaming water and other geothermal movement for which the territory is known. Sources differ concerning the topographical meaning of Colter's Hell. In 1809, Colter was caught by Blackfoot heroes. They stripped him bare and took everything from him prior to stating that he was allowed to leave. Colter couldn't really accept that his karma until he understood that he had quite recently become part of a horrible round of human chasing for sport. The fighters pursued him. In spite of the fact that he escaped the majority of them, he needed to confront one, killing the man with his own lance prior to taking his cover and stowing away in a stream to maintain a strategic distance from the others. Over the following 11 days, Colter made the burdensome 320-kilometer, 200 miles, venture back to Progress. He ate bark and roots and had just the cover for warmth. Having endured this experience, he chose to revisitation of Progress and carry on with a calmer life. 9. The shooting of David Lunt. One night in January 1877, David Lunt was in a cantina in the wilderness town of Deadwood, South Dakota, when an irritated tanked man entered. As the marshal of the town endeavored to quiet him, the alcoholic inadvertently discharged his pistol into Lunt's head. For a great many people, a shot to the head would be the end. However, not for David Lunt. He tranquilly got up, left the bar, and returned home as spectators stared at the projectile opening in his head. Lunt proceeded with everyday life and appeared to have no torment. Notwithstanding, following 2 months, he started to grumble of compounding cerebral pains. A brief time frame later, Lunt passed on. The post-mortem examination uncovered that the shot had made a terminal canker structure in his mind. 8. The tragedy of the Donner Party. The narrative of the Donner Party is a sickening story of affliction, starvation, and human flesh consumption. In 1846, a gathering of 89 individuals, driven by Jacob and George Donner, left Springfield, Illinois, to begin another life in California. During the underlying piece of the excursion, individuals from the Paiute clan took or slaughtered a considerable lot of the gathering's steers. In any case, this was just the beginning of their troubles. Attempts to discover alternate routes cost the gathering important time. By October, they actually had not made it over the Sierra Nevada mountain reach to the general security of California. After substantial snowfall obstructed the pass over the mountains, the Donner Party had to set up camp at Truckee Lake and stand by out the unpleasant winter. As the colder time of year delayed and the provisions of food dwindled, starvation and lack of healthy sustenance set in. The individuals who wished to endure had to fall back on the human flesh consumption by eating their dead companions. A gathering of less than 20 men, ladies, and youngsters, known as the Pitiful Hope, formed stopgap snowshoes and set out from the camp to discover help. A couple have made it to the opposite side of the mountains. The leftover individuals from the gathering passed on of hypothermia, depletion, or starvation. The assemblages of the individuals who had fallen were utilized to take care of the survivors. It was not until April 1847 that the last survivor at Truckee Lake was safeguarded. At this point, less than 50 of the first gathering were as yet alive. 7. Hugh Glass. In 1823, trapper Hugh Glass was attacked by a bear in South Dakota while on an expedition. Although he was able to kill the bear, Glass was left badly wounded by the attack. He had suffered a broken leg, a ripped scalp, a punctured throat, and numerous gashes. His expedition partners, John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, believed that Glass would not survive his injuries. After several days, they decided to put him in a shallow grave, take his weapons, and leave him for dead. Glass, however, had other plans. After regaining some strength, he began the journey back to civilization. This approximately 320-kilometer, 200 miles, trip would have been difficult at the best of times. But for someone as badly injured as Glass, it was a formidable ordeal. On many occasions, his agonizing pain forced him to crawl for miles. But eventually, he arrived at his destination. After he recovered, he set out to take revenge on Fitzgerald and Bridger. However, upon tracking them down, he decided to forgive them. Does this tale sound oddly familiar? It was the inspiration behind the 2015 film The Revenant, which starred Leonardo DiCaprio. 6. The Wilbarger Scalping. In 1827, Josiah P. Wilbarger fabricated a ranch on the Colorado River. At some point, he and his gathering were out exploring when a few individuals from the Comanche clan assaulted Wilbarger's gathering. 2 of Wilbarger's men were executed quickly while another 2 escaped. Wilbarger himself was hit by 2 bolts, 1 in every leg, and was additionally struck by a shot on his neck. Realizing that playing dead was his solitary possibility of endurance, Wilbarger lay still as the adversary drew nearer. At that point, all of a sudden, one of the tribesmen got Wilbarger's head and scalped him. How he didn't shout in torment is a wonder. After the tribesman left, Wilbarger lay in desolation while dreams of his sister, Margaret, guaranteed him that help would come. Without a doubt, the individuals who had gotten away from the assault got back to the homestead, and a gathering set out to support Wilbarger. Eventually, he endured the ordeal. For 11 years, he approached his everyday business with an exceptional cap on his head to cover the territory where his scalp had once been. Shockingly, he incidentally thumped his head against a bar one day. This brought about a disease which guaranteed his life. 5. The Great Flood of 1862. As one of the worst natural disasters in American history, the Great Flood of 1862 ruined thousands of people's lives. The flood, which was caused by an unprecedented amount of rain and snow, lasted for over 40 days. As of this writing, it still holds the record in California, Oregon, and Nevada for the largest flood in each state's history. The deluge swelled rivers to the breaking point, with water spilling across the land and ruining everything in its way. Entire towns were obliterated, leaving thousands displaced and fighting for survival. Although the number of deaths was relatively low, the economic implications of the flood were enormous, with livestock killed and infrastructure destroyed. It took more than 10 years for the stricken areas to recover. Thousands of people never overcame the impoverishment caused by the flood. 4. John Heath and the Bisbee Massacre. In 1883, 5 furnished men entered the town of Bisbee, Arizona, to loot the neighborhood bank. The burglars accepted that the bank was holding the finance for several excavators working for the Copper Queen Mining Company. However, the criminals had coordinated the burglary inadequately, the finance had not been stored into the bank yet. Taking what they could, the scoundrels left the bank and were promptly involved in a gunfight in the city of Bisbee. At the point when the fight was more than 3 townsmen and a pregnant lady were dead. The posse immediately mounted their ponies and braved of town. John Heath composed a gang from the town to find and secure the outlaws. The force fizzled in their mission. However, on account of crafted by analysts, every one of the 5 crooks were in the end found and captured. Upon their catch, they involved a 6th man, in all honesty John Heath. Functioning as an inside man, he had purportedly been the genius behind the whole bank heist. All 5 burglars were condemned to death. The censured men passed on in what is as yet Arizona's biggest mass hanging. John Heath, who was attempted independently, was just condemned to life in jail since every one of the 5 crooks decided to deny his contribution during the trial. However, the townsfolk were not happy with this result and chosen to assume control over the issue. An irate horde raged the prison, took Heath outside, and lynched him from a telephone pole. 3. Margaret Handley Erskine. In 1779, a young woman named Margaret Pauley, who was later known as Margaret Handley Erskine, was traveling with her husband and her baby from Virginia to Kentucky. They wanted to establish a new life on the frontier. During the journey, they were attacked by members of the Shawnee tribe. Margaret's husband was shot and killed. The tribe members also beat Margaret before brutally killing her baby in front of her. Margaret was then taken captive by the Shawnees. Over the next 5 years, she lived with them, giving birth to another child while captive and surviving an attempt on her life by one of the tribesmen. She finally escaped from the wilderness when frontiersmen found her and purchased her freedom. They took her back to Virginia. There, she eventually remarried and lived a long life. 2. Buffalo Bill's first scalp for Custer. In 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Custer and his men lost the Battle of the Little Bighorn against fighters of the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho clans. A while later, William Frederick Cody, otherwise known as Wild Ox Bill, chose to vindicate Custer. Cody made a trip to Warbonnet Creek, where he assaulted Native Americans in a homicidal craze. Scandalously, he figured out how to kill one fighter, who was known as Yellow Hair. After eliminating the man's scalp, Cody shouted, "The primary scalp for Custer." At the time, Cody's demonstration of retribution was generally welcomed by American pioneers who likewise needed compensation for Little Bighorn. In any case, history has assisted with featuring his activities as being unbelievably boorish and inappropriate. Surely, he asserted further down the road that he lamented what he had done. 1. The Cholera Epidemic of 1873. In 1873, a cholera epidemic swept through America. It was hardest on frontier towns as they had fewer resources to treat patients and less sanitary living conditions. At the time, it was believed by some that the epidemic had been started by migrants who had first arrived in New York and then moved west. In Yankton in the Dakota Territory, Dr. J.B. Van Velsen described migrants to his frontier town as filthy persons. He said they could not be compelled to adopt sanitary precautions. According to Velsen, they preferred not to use toilets, instead urinating and defecating just outside of the buildings where they were located. The people who contracted cholera often died quickly. The disease was known to wipe out 50 to 60% of the population of a wagon train or small settlement. Quite often, towns were forced to quarantine themselves to limit the spread of the disease. It is estimated that thousands of settlers who headed west died of disease each year during the 18th and 19th centuries.